quite a few years ago. Kense, hello? Okay.
Hello, hi everyone.
Okay. Please, Kense, introduce yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Kemsong Puluking from the Faculty of Health Sciences and Department in Biology. I'm one of the lecturers. I was appointed at UCT as part of the phase one of the NGAP cohort, and now I'm in my seventh year at UCT. Yeah, thanks, Rob.
Okay. Who else wants to jump in?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Oh, good afternoon, actually.
Karen, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I'm Karen Demore, and I'm from the Department of Maths and Applied Maths in the Morrell Research Group.
Karen, how long ago was it that you attended one of these things?
I'm just trying to look it up now. It would have been 2013 or 2012 by the looks of things.
Sure.
So quite a while ago.
Great. Who else is there? Anybody else? Or just steam ahead? Okay. Please, Alison or Christine, if anybody puts their hand up, will you, as we go along, you'll just let me know. Sorry, this is a very informal presentation. I mean, it's formal to the extent that we're here and there's a PowerPoint on, but I do like to proceed informally so that if you've got a question, I'll happily take it now. If I can just say that I sometimes lose the plot a bit because this is an old standard presentation and it's about the process that you do need to know about, but most of you, I think, will be interested in how it affects you in your application. So some of the formal stuff you may already know or may not be very interesting, but let me start with these three bullet points, particularly for those. Yes, Philip. Philip, can you come and look here, please? I have no idea how this works. Where's the volume? You can't. Thanks. Okay, can you hear me? Oh, it's going up. Better? Okay, I'm still going to carry on talking. I'm going to carry on talking till I see is better. Okay. Thanks very much, folks. So this first slide is basically an introductory slide which explains for people who don't know what NRF rating is. An NRF rating is a national system that is replicated in places like Brazil, slightly different, as distinct from the collective rating processes which do departmental reviews, for example, in the UK. So it's quite idiosyncratic to South Africa, the NRF rating system. But it has currency because if you're successful in your rating, you have something that you can present and will testify to your research activity in at least in a national environment. And I think the system is known fairly well, particularly in Anglophilic countries. So it's an assessment of your recent research track record. So the record means publications. Effectively, it can include patents, can include conference proceedings, but basically it's things, outputs. Is you have to have a record of it. You can't claim something. It has to be a record. And the recent refers to 8 years. The standard NRF rating period is for 8 years. The rating that you receive is for 6 years. So basically, when you make a reapplication, you can claim the last 2 years of your previous rating cycle. That's effectively what it means. So there is an issue quite often encountered amongst people wishing to apply, which is the issue of timing. So you can look at your last 8 years and say, you know, what is optimal for me? And sometimes people will wait a bit, and sometimes they'll apply because they want to cash in the 2 years that fall the furthest back in their record. So that I'll come to how the assessment is made shortly. The next bullet that talks about quality. So quality is a very contested term. It means lots of different things to different people. And the easiest mistake to make is to say that the quantity equals quality. That is only partially the case. Obviously, it's good to have lots of publications, but people with lots of publications sometimes do not get rated. Why is that? One of the reasons will be that it is deemed that the quality of those publications is not good enough. So quality is something, something that's really important. And just to jump ahead, there are 3 major issues that you need to bear in mind when you are applying for rating. The coherence of your research, the impact, and the quality. These are the big 3. They are identified in all NRF rating documents, and each of them requires consciousness on your part and a particular presentation of your research record to the best effect. And one of my jobs historically has been to help you to do that. It's an international peer review system, and we'll get to more detail shortly, but often I'm asked, does that mean that you need to have reviewers from inside the country and outside the country? And generally the answer is yes, but it's not an uncomplicated question. But it's an international system that tries not to treat South Africa as a small, isolated, irrelevant country, but rather part of a global academic community. Could you please do the next slide, Christina? Okay, so this is also a frequently asked question, why should I be rated? I'll just go through the bullets. So if you say I'm A rated or B rated or C rated or I'm NRF rated, at least in South Africa, mostly people will understand what that means. It will mean that you are in the top 25% of academics in the country actually are rated. It's about 25% of academics who are rated. The others choose not to be rated or aren't rated. So it is something to have a rating, whatever you get. And it's because it's this proxy. It stands for an achievement. It can be used, and I suspect it's often the case at UCT, as a way to focus your mind on keeping on publishing. So if you plan to continue to be rated, then you have to plan to continue to publish. It's a form of benchmarking. So universities often will boast. Hang on a moment. I'm about to give you the figures. Thank you, Jackie. I'm going to read them out. So when universities claim, as UCT does, that it has a particular international, global, and national status, it will use these kinds of figures. UCT has 503 NRF rated scholars. 155 of these are B, 245 are C, and 69 are Y. I will explain these B, C, and all of that later. 30 are A-rated, and UCT has a quarter of all A-rated scholars in the country. So we punch very much above our weight, given that they're 24, in fact more, because the research institutes are also part of that. So we do very well. And we've got 39% of all P-rated, which is the world-leading junior category. So UCT can, on the basis of this, claim to be an excellent research institution. The numbers bear it out. I'm not sure what the national percentage of UCT now is. 1 year we were top in terms of numbers, but because our staff complement is a lot smaller than UNISA and Pretoria and so forth, we are not now numerically the university with the most NRF-rated academics, but the university does well. So that's benchmarking. I think I'm kind of mixing up benchmarking and assisting universities to improve institutional research profile. So when I was in the research office from 2010 to 2015, one of my jobs would be to support academic staff to get promoted, was to build the number of NRF-rated scholars. And you can access NRF funding. So for those of you who don't know, the NRF puts out calls, invites applications for funding, and there is a call for all, and there's a call for rated researchers. So if you apply as a rated researcher, the pool of competitors is smaller. Now, the reason why this slide has changed over the years is that the NRF policy has changed. And in the past, a major inducement would be money, that if you got rated, you would get money annually, 100,000 Rand. If you were A-rated, 80,000 Rand. If you were B-rated, I think it was 40 or 50 if for C-rated. Now you get 30,000 Rand over 6 years, peanuts. So there's basically not much inducement, financial inducement any longer. It's much more, I think, a matter of pride and other considerations. Could I have the next slide, please, Christina? So these are the rating categories that I've just alluded to. Y and P are what I call junior categories. C, B, and A are senior. And if we go to the next slide, it will become apparent why I make this distinction. So it's an age distinction. Sorry, it's the next slide. So A researchers, you can read it there for yourself. Leading international are the two key words. So if one has aspirations to be an A-rated, your narrative and your research profile needs to reflect leadership. And leadership is understood in different ways by various people. Your job is to persuade reviewers, those international peer reviewers, that your work is leading, which means what? Is it, sometimes they say it's a prow of a ship, you know, it pushes up the bow wave, so that you're leading, you're the first part of the ship. And some people say that's a bad metaphor because it's the whole ship, actually. Anyway, I won't get into the complications. But leading is a key word. And when you're writing a narrative, you need to invite your reviewers to agree with your self-assessment. I'll get to this. And if your self-assessment is that you are leading, then you need to make it explicit. Don't expect a reviewer to put words in that you haven't put in yourself. And the same goes for B rating. If you consider yourself to have international recognition, then you better say that you've got international recognition and have evidence to back it up. Now, I'll get to all of this in some detail, but these are fairly critical distinctions, for example, here between A and B, and when I get to C shortly, you will begin to see how this language translates into reviewer assessments. So this is not arbitrary. In fact, this is a tightly knit system that tries to assess whether you're world leading, internationally recognized, and the third one, please, Christina, is established. So I'm often asked, you know, in more detail about this. The C is actually the one that I think most people are interested in, because established is kind of a very neutral term. What does it mean in practice? It means if you are an early career researcher, you will be expected to have broken away from your supervisor, to be publishing alone. So you're standing on your own 2 feet. So you are not just holding on to the coattails of your supervisor or even your postdoc supervisor or mentor, that you are leading, you're initiating your own research, you're conceptualizing it. So established often can be read off your publications. So if you've got publications when you're a doctoral student, is there a difference between when you're a doctoral student and when you've developed, grown, established your own kind of academic identity? And the distinction, yes. Yes. Do you need the mic? But anyway, you've asked your question. Sorry, what's your name again? Andre. Um, so Andre asked a question about if you're working in teams, is that a disadvantage? And the short answer is yes, it is. But it's not a terminal and fatal disadvantage. So in your case, it would be understood by peers in your field that the big experimental projects require lots of collaborators. They require different people doing different things. The acid test would be, are you first or last author on any of those? Yeah. And an ability to explain your unique contribution to the project so that you've got a niche expertise that is one of a number that is brought together in these experiments. So yeah, there are cases, it sounds to me like yours would be one, where that particular distinction of are you still working with your supervisor and what, and have you grown beyond that, you could explain quite convincingly that is what has happened. Yeah. So again, when we get to the narratives, it's really, really important. I mean, it's a standard NRF question about when you're in teams, are you a handlanger or are you actually a critical part of the team? And that really, you can't distinguish that without some assistance from via the narrative. So the onus really is on you to import into your narrative what other people have said about your work, so you can quote from emails or reviewer reports or whatever. So, I mean, it is difficult, remembering that in some of the physics teams, there are 350 authors. And we have had P-rated people, from those big 350 author articles. So there are ways around it, but there's no doubt that it's a challenge. It's a particular kind of challenge, but one that, I mean, has been successfully undertaken by people like yourself. Yes. Yes. Well, I think one question in the self-assessment, one sentence in the self-assessment saying that in our discipline, the convention is that authors are presented alphabetically. But in some of these, for example, I've initiated it, or it's my idea, or it builds on. So, it's the story that you tell. And particularly if you've got a lineage that you start from here and you're working on the question and you get to there, then if this is what's being assessed, you remind people that you actually have been exploring this particular problem for 20 years. And then you say, actually, 20 years ago, I did this paper. I've just continued. So that's the skill. The narrative is not incidental. It's a very important part of the project. And my major goal in these workshops is to underscore that, because I think a lot of people think that it's just, you just throw a few things, paragraphs there, and then it'll be fine. And the publications will speak for themselves. They don't, is the bottom line. Nick, yes. Yes, that's a bit like Andre's question. So what happens, the question, if people can't see it, is what happens if a supervisor is one of the authors, but the paper is led by the applicant, the NRF rating applicant? You would have to declare that. If I can just alert you to a danger that I have seen quite often. Quite difficult to say. Academics are quite competitive, and sometimes you get resentments coming into a narrative and claims about certain things. Just be aware that the reviewers actually may read your narrative and not particularly like it and contest it. So if you say, you know, my supervisor is absolutely useless, you know, the name of that person is on the authorial line, but I did all the work, it may be true, but you know, maybe not diplomatic. Maybe find another way of putting that across. Just a warning. You just alert me if there are any more. And the P, we're now going to what I call the junior ratings. The age, this is the age, why I call them junior, 35 years or younger, with a doctorate in the last 5 years, demonstrating that they're a future leader. Demonstration of futureness is a difficult thing, but you can do it. I mean, some of these young people get articles in Nature and Science at a phenomenally young age. They grow incredibly quickly. They often, or generally, very clever and very fortunate. There are a lot of very, very clever people who don't get the breaks. You need a couple of standout, high-profile publications in a very relevant area to be a P. Next slide, please, Christina. So why 40 years and younger with a PhD in the last 5 years? So here you have to demonstrate some potential to be established, and this is one of the easier. I don't wish to make it sound too easy, but it's one of the easier categories to qualify for. You need a number of publications, not an obstacle then to be publishing with your supervisor and your mentor. You are considered to be in the growing stage, not having established yourself. So I'd say the biggest challenge for Y rating is to get a number of publications that constitute a corpus of work. And that can, in some of the sciences with teams, you can get a lot of publications and maybe still battle a bit to show that you're part of the team. In other areas, if the convention is single-authored, it can be a hike to produce 6 or 7 single-authored articles. So it may take a bit of time. We can move on, Christina. Okay, so now I'm going to spend time on the process. And the reason why this is important is because for a long time, ever since I've been familiar with the NRF rating process, there have been dark suspicions about how biased the process is. And I want to reassure you that I don't think it is biased. I think sometimes there are unusual and sometimes even unfair outcomes, but I want to explain that there's procedural protection. That this process that I'm going to describe is a very fair process. It's the same for everybody, and it's very methodical, and there are many, many steps. So it's not like one person will get your application, say it's rubbish, not going to rate that person, or another person, I remember this person, I rather like them, I'll give them an A. It's not like that at all. It in fact starts with the top submission of scholarly achievements. That is shorthand for your application. The call will be made, I think, in the next 2 weeks, was it? Yeah, you will be invited in the near future to put an application together, and that is a scholarly of your submission of your scholarly achievement. We'll talk about that in more detail just now. But basically, it's narratives and uploading your CV very tediously onto the NRF website. I think the website has improved a little bit over the years, but maybe not everybody even agree with me. It's tedious, folks. I'm not going to shy away from it. So that's the first green block there. Once you've done that, it goes to a specialist committee. There are 25 odd of these, and they have members from about 4 to 8, depending on how big these committees are. There are at least 2 in health science. There's one in history. There's an omnibus one, which is anthropology, development studies, sociology, something, a whole lot developed. Well, anyway, I can't remember. And that's got more members because they're more kind of subdisciplines. Anyway, there are specialist committees, each with a convener and a number of members. And these members are invited by the NRF pretty much from a list of rated researchers, pretty much. I'm just trying to remember if I was ever on a committee that had unrated people. I think you have to be an insider to be part of the rating specialist process, and ordinarily you'd serve for 2 or 3 years. Now, on that committee, your first task once you receive the application would be to say, this one is not going to fly. You don't even send it out for review. It's actually a common practice now in some journals. And the university will receive the unwelcome news from the NRF saying, we're not going to send this out. It's generally premature. We don't think it's going to succeed. 1 in 20. It's not common. But I'm just going through the process. Yes. No. But then I got a lot of whiskey. Yeah. Okay, so once the specialist committee has got the application, their first task is to select the reviewers. Used to be 8, it's now 6. It used to be 8 because it's dropped to 6 because of fatigue. Too many applications, people are tired of writing reviews. So it's 6, and those 6 are selected in 2 ways. 3 will be selected from the list of reviewers that you recommend in your application, and 3 will be selected from independently. We're looking at lists that the NRF compiled. You can use Google Scholar, you can ask people, but it's supposed to be an equal mix of independent and own reviewers. And that process is very, very important because those reviewers and what they say will determine your rating. That's it. Critical moment right there, which means it's very important to recommend good reviewers in your own application. It's again not a task that you should take lightly, and I will talk about that more shortly. Then, presuming that people actually write review reports, they receive the reports, send them out, get them back, and then you have a meeting over here, which members of the specialist committee and an assessor, an outside person within the NRF, who's tasked with standardizing across committees. And there often quite fiery conversations occur. So a selection, a specialist committee, each application will be given a rating by each member of the committee. So for example, say I am a reviewer. Let me say I'm on the specialist committee. I get a whole stack of applications. I go through each of them. The first thing I do is I say, is this an excellent reviewer report, a usable and good report, or an unusable report? That's the first thing I do. The unusables are tossed aside and you're left with the 2. Once you've done that, the usable reports are assessed by each member of the committee as A, B, or C, or P or Y. So you are now exercising your critical faculties in relation to the NRF rules, impact, coherence, and quality, and you are deciding whether the person is established, internationally recognized, or internationally leading, or none of the above. You are unrated, very unwelcome, or are you, rating unsuccessful. So that's why this process becomes hotly contested, because you've got up to 4 people or up to 8 on the specialist committee, each with their own assessment, plus the assessor with her or his assessment, and you're now going to discuss each individual application. And the difficult ones are B3, C1, A, B, C3, RU, the borderline ones. And they are very difficult to resolve. Next slide, please. Yibu. Yes, yes, I am. Sorry, Andre. So here, as I said, there's no consensus. When you go blue in the face, nobody will agree that this is going to be a C1 or a B3, for example. It gets kicked aside and it goes to another committee that then has to make the decision, the Executive Evaluation Committee. So again, I would say 10% in my experience was non-consensus. So it would be, even within a committee, you can get very strongly held views. And those views are determined by the language and the interpretation of the language in the review reports. So leading. So can you say a person is A-rated if reviewers don't use the word leader? Well, it's a tough question because particularly the European reviewers don't use kind of, I don't know, flowery language. They're kind of modest. But you've got to interrogate the review reports, and it's the interpretation of those reports that becomes absolutely central to this agreement and non-agreement, which is why the reviewers and what they say is so important, because you're not bringing anything other than your interpretation of the evidence. It's just the evidence that is the evidence. You can't adduce further evidence. You've just got those 6 review reports. Now, if you agree, you'll decide B, C, or Y, and that will result in a letter going to the university, and that letter will be passed on to the successful candidate. That's it. If you recommend A or P, it will go for confirmation to this committee, because they're big stakes. They don't always trust the specialist committees. Inform the applicant. And if the applicant doesn't like it, you can appeal. UCT, Christina, 5 appeals a year, about? Yeah. So there are appeals. The success rate in appeals used to be very, very low. When I was on the appeals committee, it was horrifyingly low. They've taken all the hard guys out now, and it's a little bit easier. But it's a lot of work to mount an appeal. So, but some people feel very, very badly done by, and that's good. There needs to be an appeal process. It needs to be rugged. You can't just roll over and say, you're right, we're wrong, or vice versa. Are there any questions about this? Because I've still got a bit to say. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I've gone through some of these points already, but let me repeat them. Selecting reviewers, it's the job of the specialist committee. They rate the quality of the review reports. I've said that. Decide the rating value. I've said that. Recommending a rating. I've said that. Identifying feedback. At the end of the process, when a B, C, or Y rating has been agreed, the committee has to sign off on the reasons for that rating. Now, in the past, that was done by a committee member. Often it's exhausting to be 2 days in these meetings. Now they generally get a professional writer. The quality of feedback has always been a problem. In sometimes excellent, sometimes very uninformative and infuriating. So it's there. And then we advise the NRF. Yes. Yes, you do. Yes. Let me come to that now. The question for those of you who didn't hear is that I hope you're enjoying the head of the view of my bald pate, which is pretty much the only thing you're seeing. I know I've got some fellow travelers here, so I don't feel so bad. The selection of reviewers, I think, there are a couple of critical things. This is one of them. So if you're going to select 6, generally, these are the things you don't do. You don't put your supervisor. for either doctoral or postdoc. The NRF discourages collaborators. My view is different. I think you should have at least one collaborator because they can comment on your contribution, and you should make that explicit in the motivation. There's a line for motivation. If you work in teams, you need that. Generally, you don't nominate students, but that becomes difficult the older you get. I mean, maybe you saw that student 20 years ago. They're now actually quite important in their own right. So all of these I wouldn't say are absolutely rigid, but they're guidelines. So collaborators, only one. Supervisor, definitely not. Students, very unlikely. From your own institution, I think one is fine. There's a whole kind of weird stuff about you can't get people in your own institution, as though somebody in your own institution will necessarily endorse you. I mean, hello, come to UCT and find out how competitive this environment is. They're likely to stick a knife in your back, I mean, it's like such a stupid idea. Anyway, so those are important distinctions. The international, national. If you think you're internationally recognized, then you've got to have international reviewers. If you're going for established researcher, it doesn't matter so much. So again, the choice of reviewers needs to be matched to your vision and your argument. The other really important practical consideration is to ask the question, are they going to write the review? I mean, a lot of people are very, very busy. So I get quite a lot of review requests. I mostly do them, but I was in the system. A lot of people say, no, I'm not going to do. So I normally say, if you're going to nominate a reviewer, actually notify them beforehand and ask them or tell them. Say, this is, if they don't know what the NRF system is, tell them very briefly and say, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to nominate you. Because if they're forewarned, they may be inclined to write. Now, there have been ethical objections that this is somehow a process of bribery. It's not an argument that I accept, but there is this fear because there have been cases. I was once on the appeal committee where the exact same report appeared under two names. So there is a little bit of skullduggery in the system. But I think that the biggest problem is actually reviewer fatigue. And it also doesn't help if somebody writes, this person is brilliant, one sentence. It's not going to help you. That's going to be a 3 report, no evidence, wada. So it's really, really important. And maybe the final consideration is if person A knows person B's work, then writing the review report is going to be pretty easy. If they've got to read the 5 best outputs that they've never read before, it's going to add a substantial number of hours and difficulty to the task. So all of those considerations, I think, are important. Are they going to do the work? Do they know your work? Do they have a relationship with me? Yes. Yes. Is essential to just say, look, you're not going to be telling them I'm a nice guy. It needs to be about my reason. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Philip.
They have no idea about this rating. My job to say them everything.
The NRF provides a standard invitation, but I don't think it provides enough background. So for example, it's very common in the States. If you get an American reviewer, they think the person's applied for a job or whatever, and they write like really over the top flowery stuff. So they don't understand, and it's frustrating for them to know that they've basically wasted their time. So I think it is helpful to have a short paragraph saying, this is a South African system, and it's my research that's going to be assessed here. So they will get something from the NRF, but I don't think it's enough. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've just been through this last point, ideological difference. It goes to you can exclude reviewers, and mostly I discourage that. There are cases when you've got labs that are working on the same thing and hunting for patents, and they are clearly competitors with one another, and it makes sense to exclude people who are in direct competition and have no reason to say nice things about you. But for the most part, I don't encourage exclusions. There are also some quite well-known personal animosities. So I do think that there are cases, but the most extreme case was an exclusion, no reviewer from the United States. It's sort of obviously had a beef about how the US did research. And the other was like a qualitative researcher saying, no quantitative researcher can be a reviewer on this, and vice versa. So you've got these really defensive positions coming forward, which actually discredit you. If I'm now going to write a review and I see that, I think, yo, this person's got issues. Next one. Yes, Philip.
Just a quick question. Suppose rating.
Yes.
Established. How important is the international aspect of your reviews? And I'll illustrate it. My previous round, I know one of the reviewers that the NRF appointed from the UK.
Yes.
But if nationalness is not an issue on a C rating, why did the NRF go to an international review?
Well, it is an international peer-reviewed system, so why they did that there would be a lot of factors. For example, maybe they asked the South African ones and they didn't actually produce reports. So, I mean, if you are in your area, I mean, your audience is, I think, international. You're not writing only about tax and finance in South Africa, right? So people elsewhere are reading the journals that you publish in will have an interest and an expertise. So the international, I don't think is a particular deal breaker. It's a strange thing. I tell this story quite often, but one time there was an appeal, and the aggrieved party who lodged the appeal failed. But it was really interesting because we realized that one of the reviewers was actually on the excluded list, that this person specifically had said this person should not be asked. The NRF is not obliged, by the way, to accept your feelings on this, but actually it was the most positive report. So I mean, you can't really predict these things. So I think that who's going to write a fair-minded report is not easy to predict, and sometimes it benefits you that it's locally based, showing a lot of knowledge of the local environment, and sometimes not, and vice versa. So I think South Africa's niche advantage actually is that we are doing stuff that is interesting to international audience as much as it is to a local audience. So I think you can leverage that. It also goes to how you write the narrative. Yes, Andrew. Yes. They do. They outside of that, they've got to find another 3. No, there are of the 6, 3 will be asked, and if they come through, they will be matched with another 3. But often there's no response, so they will work right through your list of 6. And if your final report says that actually they couldn't find enough reviews from your own list, what does that tell you about your reviewers? And that happens. They will choose. There's no sequence. You don't sequence. Sorry, Christina. Yes. Yes. Yes, exactly. No. That's no problem. Not a problem. it's really not a problem. You know, it's not an uncommon problem either that we have new staff coming. You know, they've been working on geomorphology, you know, of igneous rocks in Iceland, you know, and yeah, kind of thing. So it's not a problem. Mm. Well, it does, Philip. It doesn't really work like that. I mean, the imperative is to get 6 review reports. Ideally, it's 3 independent, 3 reviewer. So let's take a couple of hypothetical examples. You put 6 reviewers there. They 3 of them come through. The NRF battles. They can't find anybody else to complete the suite of 3 independent. They may well then go to get one of yours. It's I don't know if you know, but sometimes you'll see we approach 20 reviewers, you know, no response. So often at about this time of year, you'll get a kind of a panic email from the NRF saying, please, you know, we've got 4 reports. Yeah. And so it's not a perfect system. So they're not excluded, no. And it should be to your advantage if 4 of your nominated people are invited.
So the idea of six, I think it sounds to me like it's the wrong idea.
No.
Put what you think the 6 best reviewers of your work, put them on there, don't be strategic about it.
Well, I'm not sure, Philip. I don't know if the audience can hear. It's like, how do you select your 6 own reviewers? And one of the things I've frequently commented on is if your 3 own reviewers are the most prominent and obvious people to be reviewers, I wouldn't nominate them because actually they're likely to be nominated by the specialist committee. I would nominate further down, particularly if those people are going to say positive things anyway. So I think there is strategy, but it depends on how general and well-known your work is. You know, as I say, the biggest problem now is actually to get 6 review reports. You know, that's the biggest challenge. We done. Okay. So I've gone through some of these. I want to talk about impact. Let me start with quality. So I'm often asked what demonstrates quality. And this is really a question of evidence. So what do you say in your self-assessment, which is the 3rd narrative block? There are 4 narrative blocks: personal information, biography, description of own research, self-assessment, future research. The 3rd block, the self-assessment, is critical. They're all important, but the 3rd is critical. This is where you tell them what you think about your own research. It's your own argument. It's your self-assessment. Now, in that self-assessment, you have to make an argument about the quality of your research, because quality is going to be one of the constituent deciding criteria of your rating. So you want to be saying, the quality of my research is excellent because, and this is where the challenge is. Why is it excellent? Well, maybe you've developed a methodology. Maybe you're interdisciplinary and you've crossed many boundaries. Maybe you're the first person to look at a particular thing or a particular number of things. Maybe you've gone all the way back to Darwin, you've traced things through, and actually history's on your side. This is an enduring phenomenon. Nobody's really explained it. You're going to explain it. So there are a lot of ways of making the claim that your work is high quality. And if you link this with standing, if you're doing this with some of the top researchers in your field in the world, that's a proxy for quality. This person is working with me because they recognize that, you know, my ideas are sound. So there are a whole number of ways that you can make the argument about quality, including quoting verbatim from various sources, review reports of your articles. If you in the human science, if you've written a book, from book reviews. There are ways of bringing in evidence to support your case. So you can't just say my work is excellent and then leave it at that. You have to bring certain arguments to bear to show the quality, which is different from the impact, because impact mostly is about bibliometrics. My work's been cited 10,000 times. It's clear it has academic impact. People are reading it, they're citing it, it's obvious. So you have to use bibliometrics, but impact is not the same as quality. As I say, quality is a qualitative thing. You have to make the argument about the novelty, etc., etc. Philip, I thought that was your last question. Brew. Yeah. I think
More than acceptable.
reviewers will decide, firstly, so there's no absolute measure of that. But I think what reviewers don't like is what Abdul Slim Karim used to call Me Too research. So A, B, and C have all proved the same thing. So you go and do the same experiment, you find the same thing, and you publish it. And they say, well, like, where's the novelty? Where's the quality? This guy's just, is just copying. So there has to be, I think, some demonstration of value add. What is your contribution to knowledge production? Show me. Don't tell me that, somebody threw that stone exactly the same distance as you and say you're the same. Show me something different. So that's in the argument. That's a very helpful question. So that the quality, if you're internationally leading, you would expect the quality to be excellent. That other people are going to be following you because you're leading. Whereas if you're established, you've got following somebody, but you've got some value add. Well, how do you? I don't know how to distinguish that, Philip. You've got to show that you've got a niche area because you're going to be rated in something. So if you are in tax, then you may have a subfield of tax, and then you've got to show what your particular contribution is to understanding tax better. And then it could be case studies, it could be particular, tax collection instruments, whatever it is, you've got to show that relative to a whole range of other publications, your article is now cited and it's making a contribution to understanding something that's only partially understood or not well understood. Not even a question hasn't been asked before. If you're the first person to ask a question about something, that's novel, that's quality. So conceptualizing a question is an important contribution. So all of these things, the narrative is not, it can be sometimes very easy, but I think it does require one to be quite reflective on what actually have I contributed here? And it seems to me you're grappling with that question, Philip, a little bit. So impact, the other thing I want to say, and maybe Ian is the person to address here, Ian's in architecture, is so what is an impact beyond an academic article? Design. So when we see the definition of research, you will see that procedures, policies, if you're a lawyer, cases, in other words, to produce precedents, those are all things that are evidence of impact. So we once had a surgeon who actually successfully applied for an A. Said, I was the first person ever to figure out how to do this, a procedure now used all over the world. And the previous thing, that's not a research output. He said, actually, no, it is a research output. And actually, that actually is globally leading. So it's those kinds of things in design. The performing arts, photographers, architects, dramatists, novelists, always battle a bit to show what impact is. Lawyers as well. So you can make an argument about impact that's not about bibliometrics. You should use bibliometrics if you've got them. If they're strong, use them strongly. If they're not so strong, buttress them, add stuff to them. You haven't finished your quota here, Philip. You can ask a question. That's standing. Both. Yeah, it's both.
Another form of evidence could be a
Yes. So this is, so you put these things together on their own. They are not. It's not sufficient. It may be necessary. It's actually not necessary, but it's certainly not sufficient to prove the point. You put the whole lot of things together. You know, actually, I was giving a plenary here. I was invited to be on this editorial advisory board. Actually, these oaks came and asked me to guest edit a special issue. And by the way, I published these articles in the last 3 or 4 years. And I attracted a postdoc from, you know, who knows where. Now you've got, you know, it's sort of coming together. It's all testifying in the. Is that what they say in tax? Moving on. Okay. Coherence. Coherence is a problem for people in interdisciplinary research. I'm not sure if any of you are particularly affected by it. But for example, if you're working in health science, but you're interested in the practices of surgeons in the operating theatre, which is like anthropology and health science. You can fall between the two because health science will be looking for fairly standard narratives. And the NRF rating system has frequently been criticized for being very unsympathetic. And it's not that the system is unsympathetic, but reviewers, if you're in one committee, will be generally disciplinary specific. And they will look for certain things that are recognizable to them. So that's a challenge. And if you can't say that my work is X, if you're doing A, B, and C, that's lacking in coherence. You've got to put A, B, and C together and make it look like one thing. So often you do that by having one organizing research problem or question and showing how the constituent bits feed into it. They may look as though they're self-standing, but they are actually all contributing to a major research engagement, which gives you coherence. If you can't do that, then you've got problems. And those problems can result in an RU. Next one, please. Okay, so this is the form that you will fill out for those of you not familiar with it. So there's a lot of stuff that you use just dumping, it's filling out blocks. These are in the red are the 4 narrative areas that I've normally have spent time helping people with. Biographical sketch, they all got quite big limitations in terms of how long you can write. So you have to tailor it. The biographical sketch is really important. It's the chance, as I always say, to say hello to the reviewer. You're talking to somebody, or write it in the first person, not the third person. Say I, and describe who you are, what your academic identity is, where your interest came from, what inspires you, what your achievements have been. But it's not simply to cut and paste from your CV and just dump it in there. It's a terrible waste and it won't help you. So it's a starting point effectively of an argument. And your argument is, I'm an internationally recognized researcher in geomorphology, let's say that. And then, here you'd start by saying, when you got interested in rocks, maybe you won, the standard 6 prize for geography when you had to go and look at quartz in the playground, something like that. But actually, I don't say that, I say it lightly, but actually it's important to have these little stories, because then you can use them as pegs to hold your narrative together, to say this has been a lifelong interest of mine, and I pursued it, because it generates coherence. That narrative will explain to the reviewer what you're on about. What has the search been about? And it's very helpful to have that. Kense, if she's still there, has a passion for eyes. She's not there anymore. But Kense does actually the examination of the blood supply to the back of the eye. And she's been doing that since her honours work at the Free State. And she's now finished her doctorate. So for her, it would be very interesting if she were here. I would say to Kense, so how did you become interested in that? Because actually not many people are doing that. Kense, have I got it right?
Yes, Rob, you got it right. Spot on.
Didn't intrude too much there, but I always found your work so fascinating. Maybe one day you and I will help you write that narrative.
I can't wait for that time.
Okay, so that's the biographical sketch. And to repeat, that's not that. If I have to number these in terms of importance, it's 1 for self-assessment, 2 for biographical sketch, 3 for description of completed research, and 4 for future research, in that order. So the biographical sketch, you start the story. You try and write it in as lively a fashion as you can in the first person. The description of completed research is a description. What have I done? People often, mostly, confuse these two. Self-assessment is a story about what you've achieved. You're looking at your work and making an evaluation, but also the argument that presents your evaluation. This simply describes. So if you were to do this in a hierarchical way, you'd say this was the foundation and that was the superstructure. That the description is the foundation upon which you build then the assessment. Yes. Yes. It's for the 8 years. And if I can say that it's really, really important and an opportunity not to cut yourself off at the ankles, but to point out if in those 8 years that work was building on earlier work, you cash in. You don't let them, sort of just chop you off there. Say, no, I've been doing this for a while. Look at this as 1992 and that one was 2004. So you are asked to describe 8 years of work, but that doesn't mean that it's just started from nowhere. So it's really important because over here, you've got your 10 best research so that you can reference. You can cross-reference from the pre-2015 period to then cite it in and reflect it in your description of the last 8 years. And it's important to do that because people will want to know that trajectory. And Philip, I think particularly important if you're going for re-rating. So the self-assessment, I've spoken a lot about it already. It's important. You need to handle impact, quality, and coherence. Some people, you don't really need to talk about coherence. It's be very evident from your publications that you have one enterprise. All the publications are in a similar set of journals on a similar set of topics, no problem. If it's broader than that, then you may need at some point to identify what the core focus is. And that should have been identified, in fact, here in the description of completed research. So I advocate in 2 and 3 in the description of completed research, start with the first sentence. In the last 8 years, my completed research has focused on this question in these kinds of journals, addressing this kind of question. And then in the self-assessment, in the last 8 years, I have risen from an established researcher to be internationally recognized. Can even use that language. I've been I've given keynotes here. I've had 2 journal articles in the top ranked journals in my field, and 4 of my doctoral students have graduated and gone on to be employed at international universities. That's an argument. That's an argument. And then you would expand in the following paragraphs. The impact of my work can further be seen in my bibliometrics, H-index and all of that. Then actually the impact goes beyond that. I've been passing students, developing research groups, making speeches, getting funding and so forth and so on. The quality, actually, if you look at my top 5 publications, you can see these are in really good journals, or in this most recent one that's not been often cited. Actually, I'm flying totally new ideas. Nobody's done this stuff before. Tell the story. And then the coherence, if you need to, you can come to that if it's a problem. So this self-assessment is absolutely critical. And generally, you need 2 or 3 goes at it. You need to cover impact, quality, coherence. We've done the reviewers. I want to come to the 5 best recent research outputs. Often I'm asked, so which should those be? So here are some standard questions, standard answers. 1, high impact factor journals. Articles with the most citations. Those are the most obvious. But they don't answer fully the question. So what you need in your 5 best recent research outputs are outputs that are mentioned in your self-assessment and your completed research. So that if you are, for example, developing your research into a slightly different direction, you may have one paper that's got no citations, just came out. But actually you've been talking about it because it's the quality and the innovation and so forth. So you choose that one. It's got no, nobody cited it, but it's there. It's a publication. So it's not a mechanical exercise, I guess is what I'm saying. Don't just go, to your Google Scholar profile and take your best top 5 and just plonk them down there. It may work for some people, but I don't think that's a good way. I think it's a more nuanced approach. You need to think about what is it that makes your work interesting, novel, innovative, all of those things. And there will be sometimes people, the citation patterns are not uniform or standard. So you want to do that quite carefully. So the 5 best, think about it carefully. 10 best, go into your archive and fill it up. If you've got 10 publications from before 2015, put them down. And that may be excruciatingly difficult, or it may not be, but that's less important. But again, the question is, can you get value from it? Don't just plonk them there. Kind of, just knit the thing together. Say, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not a newbie here of X, Y, Z. I think we're nearly done, Christina. Okay, these are the kinds of outputs that are recognized. It's technical stuff. I can't say much about it. Often a critique will be by the way of reviewers who are not convinced by your narrative, that they'll say, well, you didn't have a keynote or a plenary. So if you do, put it in. And if you don't, tell them, like the equivalent. So try and look at these, because reviewers will possibly, particularly those who are familiar with the system, the student outputs are really important in some areas, not so important in others. I don't have much more to say. There may be questions later, Christina. So here's what I was saying about the definition of research. If you go right down here, these are frequently asked questions. Textbooks don't count, basically. Doesn't mean you don't mention them. I mean, maybe they're really, really important to how you disseminate your research. So you can't have them as a best research output, but you can basically say, look, I've been doing research in this, and I've actually also disseminated my research, and it has had an impact at schools. You can do that, but you just can't put it as a research output. Okay, so there are often questions, there are often questions about the new handbooks, the encyclopedias, all of that stuff. These invited, do people know what I'm talking about? There are millions. Sage, Routledge, I mean, everybody seems to have a handbook of X, Y, or Z, and you get invited to write chapters. Those, I think they're about standing, prestige. They're often not about impact. So again, it's a judgment call about whether you put those kinds of outputs in. Sometimes they are thought of as textbooks. I don't think of them as textbooks, but sometimes they are considered as textbooks. Sorry.
Yes, it's true.
Yes. No. Well, is it available? I mean, yes. No, I mean, it has to be I think it has to be, there has to be a record of it. I mean, not just an item on the agenda. I mean, so in other words, these are outputs, right? So it's not it's not an appearance. So if you were invited to give a plenary and you were there and you spoke and there's no record of it, it's not an output. It still can be part of a narrative to say, to my standing, I was invited and I was part. It's a distinction. Yes, then you put the web link there. Yes, but it's just an achievement. These things are relevant if you want to make them relevant as part of your profile. It goes to your standing, it goes to the impact and the quality of your work. Yeah. So your argument, for example, if there was no output, no research output, you could say, I've published this stuff, but I've also been invited to these universities to give invited addresses. So that's about your standing. So you're weaving that into a story about yourself. You're not sitting in your office, not engaging with anybody, not disseminating your work, you're only writing. That's one narrative. The other is, no, I'm actually recognized, I'm out there, I'm contributing to the scholarly community, I'm making knowledge through this process of engagement. It's your choice of how you put that. Yes, yes, yes. Well, I don't think that, yeah. Yes, 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 yes. But there is a block for this.
Yeah, but it does pages.
Yes.
Page.
I think then that's a technical question. I would put it in I would put the web address in.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah. But as I say, the more important question for me is what use are you making of that evidence? The fact that you can't load it there is kind of, for me, a technical question. It may be totally unimportant to your rating. So the bigger question is, how will this help me make the argument that I want to present? Yeah. Ibu. Yeah. It goes in that list of publications.
What's the best out?
Normally, the way I've done this is if your student is published and you're not part of it. Because that, yeah, yeah. Christina? Thank you. Siraj, thank you. No, you don't. You agreed. You won't know what rating you're likely to get. It may help to speak to colleagues who are rated and just to ask them. Um, it's a delicate thing between modesty and bombast, isn't it? You know, if you claim too much, then reviewers will think, oh, you know, this person's a bit full of themselves. And if you say too little, then they won't really get what you're about. So there is a navigation between giving as much knowledge about yourself but not overstating the case, which is why I think the personal narrative is so important at the start, because there you're giving a sense of your purpose and your passion. You're showing them not just your outputs, but your person. This is a very unusual system, this. You can actually tell a story that will, in a way, convey to the person, you know, what has brought you into the academy, how long have you been there, what drives you, you know, what are your likes and dislikes. So I think this question I've answered it, I think, but so the answer is ask a colleague, but B, indirectly try and write the narrative from the start, and hopefully that will lead you to an argument that is either an A, B, or C rating kind of argument. I think there's an organic process of writing. I think I've spoken about this. We on to the technical stuff. Jackie and Christina, anything? No. More. This is on the website, so you can get these links from the website. Jane, hi, thank you. Sorry, folks, I've kind of said as much as I'm going to say spontaneously, but I'm happy to take further questions. Christina? Yes, although I'm at some distance from it, Christina. So correct me if I'm wrong. That when you make an application for an NRF rating, you do not make it in your personal capacity. You make it in the capacity as an employee of UCT. So UCT is an important part of the process. So when you fill in your application, you are filling it in a way for UCT. And UCT is an intercessionary between you and the NRF. Now, part of that process includes a filtering developmental process, if I can put it like that, where UCT staff members, not me, will look at your application and provide feedback. And that feedback is intended to support and develop and improve your application. Occasionally, it involves the recommendation that you wait for before submitting. It's not a very popular message, but I think it is sometimes given. And then you get the chance to work on your rating application again. And generally, the closing date is the middle of February. Okay. No, no. So basically, your application is uploaded into a place that UCT controls, and then there can be exchange between you and UCT. And then when the button is hit and it goes to NRF, you never see it again. So that's why it's suspended for a few months while you can still work on it. Of course. Yeah, well,
The information that I captured on NRF 6 years ago,
yes.
is it still there? Is it rolling forward, or is it a new system?
Christine will answer it. Alison. Christina's one of her answers was that if you have a query about the NRF rating process, please just drop a line and support will be provided, and definitely an answer will be given. Is that the one? Karen, you'll let us know if that wasn't the question you were referring to. Karen is typing. Okay. Okay, thank you. Right. Anything else, folks? Oh, it's goodbye, I think. It's the internal process that I've just spoken about. Yes, they do a very good job, but they go through you, do they? Or yeah. For people who can't hear, there's a library workshop on Thursday to help with bibliometrics. Great. Great. And just maybe one final thing, particularly for people who are thinking of applying for ad hoc promotion, this is a very good test run to get your stuff together and develop a narrative about your research achievements. So I've often used it for that very purpose. And in fact, the Future Professors Program, which is a Department of Higher Education and Training program, does the same. So it's a good instrument to get you to be reflective of your research achievements and productivity. 2:01, so I think we've, Andre. Mm. 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 Indeed. Yeah, but I mean, it's no harm in putting in work a sentence and pointing out that actually these are, yeah, so no, I agree, but the focus does have to be, but goes to standing. You know, what are the things that testify to your standing? And I think it's like, you know, have you graduated doctoral students? Well, it's not, you know, it's kind of important, but some reviewers will put a lot of emphasis on it. So I've seen complaints that you're not contributing to the country's development of an academic community kind of thing. And it's not really there, but the reviewer's words count. So if you can anticipate them and weave it into the standing argument, that's helpful. Coherence. Standing is a fourth one that really goes to all of them. I think I'm going to declare this session over. I've got another meeting just now I have to walk to. It's been lovely being with you. Thank you. Thank you, Christina, Jackie, Alison, for organizing things so magnificently. I didn't do anything for this PowerPoint other than handwrite what was in one of the footnotes. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, and good luck to you all. Really good luck, with as much the preparation as the outcome. Thanks, folks. Pleasure. We're going now, but I quite like a tease that you went on.
Yeah, quick chat. Unfortunately, the main supervisor died. So, you know, I have been the one engaged in that. So, he was dying for a long time. You say so, but it happens, you know, out of the blue. It's like a celebratory dinner. Yeah, and then months after that, it's when it's been a year.